Welcome to Capitol Preview, a weekly bipartisan discussion with Iowa legislators about the key issues facing our state. Brought to you by Mediacom.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Capitol Preview, where we explore the progress and the items happening up at the State House. Our guest today is Senator Jerry Behn, Republican from Boone. And Senator Behn, I'm glad that you're here with us this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Well, how are things going overall, Jerry?
You said you were talking about progress. I thought it'd be progress or lack of progress. I thought we could talk about both a little bit. But I think things are moving on at a good pace. We've had a lot of subcommittee meetings, a lot of committee meetings, and a lot of actual floor debate. And I like to point out that a lot of what we do up there is not controversial. We did, I think, 12 bills on last Monday, and I think they all passed 48-0 or 49-0. If there's a person missing, they don't get a vote. But a lot of that stuff is not controversial, and we get to motor through that pretty quick. And then you come to one that takes on a little more of a controversial slant, and all of a sudden you'll see a 20-29 or something like that. Right. So it can slow down in a hurry, and sometimes it does. Yeah. But the rest of the time we move through pretty good. And so
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What's this? I was just going to ask you what this week looks like as far as.
This week will be almost an exact repeat of last week. Okay. We're going to do a lot of committee work, and we'll do a lot of floor debate, and we want to get bills ahead. The funnel is coming up, I think, pretty shortly. And the funnel is a self-imposed deadline that the House and the Senate have to actually get bills moving. And I've always been a fan of moving that funnel up a little bit and make it a little sooner, because it's easy to procrastinate. It's easy to put something off if it's a little controversial. Yeah. And so that really does force us to get the action moving. So the next funnel is coming up, and we got to get any of the Senate bills done, have to get over to the House. Any of the House bills got to get back over to the Senate. So we're going to be working on those and try to get them done as efficiently as possible. Yeah. And that's from government, so I'm not
exactly.
I'm not sure efficiency in government works in the same phrase, but we'll do the best we can.
And it seems like the pace is a lot faster this year.
I think it is.
You guys are moving through.
I think it is.
Things pretty fast.
One of the biggest holdups to begin with was the de-appropriations bill. The revenue estimating conference number was a little bit lower in December, and so we had to actually lower the number. There'll be another one coming out in March, and if it's lower than the December one, we have to use it. So all in all, there's been a lot of budget talk, and once we get through the remnants of last year's budget, we'll start working on this year's budget. Yeah. So that'll take a lot of time too, and a lot of times that takes on a controversial slant as well.
It's coming on though. Do you think you're going to make the April?
I do.
Deadline.
One of the things we did is move. I think it's a biennial session. Traditionally, we go 110 days the first year of the biennial session and 100 days of the second year. This year, I believe we're going to put it back to 90 and cut the legislators' per diem pay off after 90 days. And we thought, as everybody else has taken a reduction in the budget, we should share in that, and I think that's a great concept.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good gesture on your guys'
Well,
part.
I don't know if it's a good gesture. I just think it's appropriate. I think it's the right thing to do, and I'm glad we're doing that.
Yeah. Well, let's just jump right in, Senator Behn. I know you're a big proponent on passing the Civics Test for high school graduates.
I am. We had a fun subcommittee, and we had a fun committee on that debate, and interesting enough, I can give you just a quick synopsis. It's going to require students to pass a civics exam with a score of only 60% or better in order to graduate from high school. And they're going to take the latest available civics exam that's administered by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So it's the same test that new immigrants have to take in order to be a U.S. citizen. Now, one of the things that was brought up in the subcommittee was, well, you legislators think you're so stinking smart. Why don't you have that a requirement before you can be a legislator? If you're going to make kids graduate from high school. Yeah. And so I got to thinking about that a little bit, and I thought, you know what? I think I'm just going to go ahead and take this test. So I did. I went online, and it's at joefossinstitute.org. You can go take the test. It has a 10-question test that you can try it out, see how you're doing. It has a 25-question test to try out, see how you're doing. and it has the 100-question test that you actually have to take, right?
Oh, immigrants actually have to take a
100-question test, and you got to get 60 out of 100. So it's not like it's a real high bar, okay? Back in my day, 70% or below was flunking, okay? So anyway, 60%. So I took the 25-question test, because I didn't know how long I was going to have, but I took it. It didn't take that all fired long. So I thought, I'm going to take the 100-question test before I get feisty about this stuff. I don't know what I'm talking about. So I took the test. Now, grant you, I'm a little bit more of a geek probably in the political process than average. Nevertheless, I didn't miss any. Now, there was a few of the questions that off the top of my head I didn't know.
Yeah.
But when I read the answers, I could figure them out. It's a multiple choice, and I could figure out the answers. So it's not exactly a gotcha test. It is a teaching test. And I thought it was very appropriate, and I'm not bragging to say my point is, if you have a basic knowledge of how the government works, you can get through it.
Yeah.
So if children are taught that in school, and they can start trying to take it in the 7th grade, if they pass it in 7th grade, that counts towards graduation. So they've got multiple times they can take it. It's going to be a test that's set up online through the Department of Education. It's going to be free as far as the Department of Education is concerned for giving it to the children. And I think there's a slight cost, but it's not very much. And I genuinely think students really ought to have a basic working knowledge of how government functions and how we as citizens can address government, we can work with government, and we can get involved if we want to. And one of the things that was brought up in the subcommittee process is that children that understand this are much more likely to be engaged than ones who don't. Well, that only makes sense to me. And so we were criticized in the subcommittee by some of the education people that said, well, this is redundant. They already taught that. Well, then we were also told that only 1 in 5 are proficient. And our question was, well, if they're taught that, how is only 1 in 5 proficient? So I thought this is a good idea. I really do. One of the other the people brought up in the committee that this would be a barrier to graduation, make it harder for some kids to graduate. And one of the things we like to kind of tout is our graduation rate. But if they're graduating and they don't have a basic working knowledge of government, I'm going to argue that perhaps that diploma doesn't mean as much as it should. So I think this is really important. I think it's a good bill. It kind of took on a little bit of its own life and kind of got more, I don't want to say it was much to do about nothing, but it seemed to me like this is something that we should already be doing. Absolutely. So it shouldn't be an extra barrier. It shouldn't be additional work. If we don't know anything about what's going on, it's hard to get involved. So
it's our country, right?
It's our country, and it's our future. And these individuals that are coming up are going to be the future leaders. And it would be nice if they had some knowledge of what's going on. So, to me, it's one of those things that it just seemed like the right thing to do. We kind of got rolling with it a little bit, and it did make it out of the full education committee, and now it is eligible for debate on the Senate floor. So hopefully it'll get brought up. Hopefully we can get it moving over to the House. I have not chatted with the House. I do not know what their position is on it, but we're 2 separate branches. That's what well, not a separate branch, but we're 2 separate divisions within the
state
legislative branch. And so it's our job to go through the different parts and let us have our say, and then the House can have their say. So
good work.
I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Senator. Well,
My pleasure.
This is probably a very relevant topic, given what we have gone through in the last 2 weeks, and that is gun control. And I just kind of want to
gun control. Yeah. I didn't know. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because I think it's important. Just as the civics test is kind of a little bit of a lead into this, because how did the Second Amendment come into play? What is it designed to do? What were the thoughts of the framers? What was the principle behind it? And I did a little work on history, and there's a gentleman named Cesare Beccaria. He was an 18th century Italian philosopher. Think, well, who cares about an 18th century Italian philosopher? But he was instrumental, and he was recognized as ahead of his time in regards to economics and also crime and punishment and all that sort of stuff. He was actually, interestingly enough, one of the other things, if we had time, I want to talk about is the death penalty, but he was opposed to the death penalty, interestingly enough. And yet he felt that if you're armed, we could cut down on the need for the death penalty. And so I wanted to read this to you because I think this is important. This is a quote from Beccaria. Now, understand this is an 18th century philosopher, so it's coming, the way he talks is a little different, but I think this is important. He said, "False is the idea of utility that sacrifices 1,000 real advantages for one imaginary or trifling inconvenience. That would take fire from men because it burns, and water because one may drown in it. The laws that forbid the carrying of arms are laws of such a nature. They disarm those only who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Can it be supposed that those who have the courage to violate the most sacred laws of humanity," now that's murder, he's talking about murder, "the most important of the code, will respect the less important or arbitrary ones, like gun control laws, which can be violated with ease and impunity, and which, if strictly obeyed, would put an end to personal liberty, and subject innocent persons to all the vexations that the guilty alone ought to suffer. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than prevent homicides, for an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man." Now, Adams and Jefferson thought so much of this that they literally copied that paragraph down and carried it with them, and they actually used this as an argument when they were talking on some trials, and it was the basis, some of the foundation for the Second Amendment. And it just, you can't put it any better than that, and I think it's amazing because just like I got an individual who was sharing with me that pencils don't misspell words and cars don't drive drunk. And the implication is guns don't kill people. It's the individual behind the gun. And guns really are a tool. There's no question about it. They can be used for good, they can be used for bad. And I think it is much more important right now to continue on with the idea of making schools a hard target. You've heard that phrase bandied about in the news, a soft target versus a hard target. I think it's also interesting that some of the movie stars, some of the ones that are kind of drumming up the idea of getting rid of guns, are surrounded with armed guards. That always irritates me to no end. And so the reality is, I think if teachers want to carry, I think they should be allowed to carry. And I think we should contemplate the idea of putting some, we have retired military, we have retired police, that many of them would be willing to donate time, but if they're not, they could be hired and help out in some of these schools. And I think if you literally make the schools a hard target, I think what happened in Florida would not happen. So I really do think that's important, and I really do think the conversation has kind of shifted to the weapon itself. And I genuinely believe it's not the weapon itself that's the problem.
Well, you brought up some very interesting points, and I'm sure that's going to be...
And I'm sure that'll light the fire up.
Well, no, I mean... It's
some that'll agree with that and some that'll vehemently disagree. But I think it is important to understand where this comes from.
No, always. Always when you talk about big issues like this, there's going to be the naysayers and the people that support it. So it'll be a national dialogue for probably quite some time to come. I mean, since 250 years ago. So
that was another. I'm glad you said that, because that was actually one of the points I want to bring up. Is this big debate has been going on for a long, long time. This is not the first time.
Senator, we're going to have to bring that debate because we're out of time.
We're running out already.
Yeah. So Senator Behn, I appreciate you coming here and being on Capitol Preview. My name is Bill Peard. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Iowa Cable and Telecommunications Show. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Geez.